Hi there! Welcome to Explain This, a podcast where we try to explain complex things in simpler ways for people of all ages. I'm your host, Jin Kim, and today, since it's the end of the year when everyone's thinking about how the next year can be better than this year, we'll talk about the growth mindset, a general approach to life that will bring you sustained progress and growth, better results in everything from school to sports, jobs to relationships, to even bringing you a happier life. Sound too good to be true? Well, you better believe it, because there's actual science backing this up. Let's get started. Dr. Carol Dweck is a professor of psychology at Stanford University, who has been studying the phenomenon of how different people approach learning and success, and how people react differently to failure. She noticed that some students shy away from challenges and become crushed with disappointment when an obstacle arises, while some students actively seek out challenges and overcome obstacles, using it as a stepping stone for more forward progress. After years of research, she established the theory of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. In particular, the theory of growth mindset shows how a change in our mindset and perspective can greatly affect our ability to learn, grow, and succeed. It's proven to be so powerful, in fact, that numerous schools, sport coaches, and even large businesses have adopted the growth mindset in the past decade, all around the world. So, what is the growth mindset, and how can we use it to better our lives? As usual, we'll explain growth mindset to you first as if you were a child. Let me ask you a simple question. Do you think being smart is something you can change? As in, do you think being smart is something you're born with, or something you can improve on and learn so that you can become smarter? If you answer that it's something you're born with and can't change, you have what we call a fixed mindset. If you answered that it's something you can change, then you have a growth mindset. And don't worry, it's not an insult or calling you dumb to have a fixed mindset. We know that about 4 in 10 people have a fixed mindset, another 4 in 10 people have a growth mindset, and then the rest belong somewhere in the middle. The problem is that a fixed mindset can stop us from becoming better, because our brains believe that we can't get better. If you think smartness is something you're born with, it's very easy to label yourself as dumb or smart, and think you'll be that way forever. If you think you're dumb, then you're not even going to try to learn or practice, so you'll never improve. If you think you're smart, then do bad in one test and you might suddenly have an identity crisis because you always thought you were smart, but turns out you're not. Either way, you'll end up stuck in a miserable spot, never working to improve and get better while pitying yourself. On the other hand, if you have a growth mindset, your brain believes that you can do better. If you get a bad test result, it doesn't mean that you're a loser or a failure or that you're dumb. It just means you're not there yet. All you need to do is study harder and smarter, practice more, and try again, until you get good. If you get knocked down by an obstacle or a challenge, you don't let it define you or use it as an excuse to call yourself a loser, but you get back up and keep working to overcome it. To quote Rocky Balboa,
"Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done."
true winning isn't about a single result, like winning a game or doing well in one test. It's about the process and the positive trend of growth and improvement thanks to your efforts. So, there you go. Change your mindset and start believing that you can change for the better. Rocky Balboa. Such an inspiration. Alright, so you might have heard about growth mindset in recent years, whether it be at a business or a teacher's workshop or through a positive psychology podcast. The term has been slowly creeping into daily usage more and more in recent years. So, as we've briefly talked about, the essence of growth mindset is believing that people are capable of change and growth. As hippy-dippy and obvious as it sounds, like I mentioned, 40% of people believe that intelligence is something you cannot change. This is what we call the fixed mindset, and it's surprisingly common. Many people listening right now would fit in this category, or have been at one point. And that's not a bad thing, it's just how we've learned to perceive the world. Hands up if you can empathize with any of the following scenarios. You thought you were not very smart at school because you'd rarely get an A on a report card. You think you're terrible at baking because the few times you've tried, something would literally explode. You believe in the phrase, once a cheater, always a cheater. You've avoided attending a tournament because you were secretly scared that it might show that you're not actually good at the sport or game that you play. You routinely berate yourself for making a costly mistake that you're embarrassed about. These are all common examples of how the fixed mindset manifests. And don't be ashamed if you think you have a fixed mindset. Just by being aware of that and wanting to listen to the rest of the episode means you're doing well. So the other side of the spectrum, and our topic of the day, is the growth mindset. This is a belief that if we're not good at something, then we can take action to get better at it. It's a belief that we can change for the better through effort. People with a growth mindset don't believe that a challenge is an obstacle. Instead, they think of it as an opportunity to test themselves and to improve. Instead of wallowing in despair and sadness that they did badly in a test, got rejected in a job interview, or lost a game, people with growth mindsets think, what can I do to do better next time? A great analogy is a comparison of ants and people. If a person comes across an obstacle blocking their way, the most common response would be, why is this Snorlax blocking the road? Who's responsible for this? Am I dumb for choosing the wrong path? Whereas if an ant came across an obstacle, they wouldn't look for who to blame, but instead they'd immediately get to thinking how they're going to overcome the obstacle. They'll try going around it or calling on their friends to clear the road. Essentially, people tend to ask, why didn't this work? While ants ask, how can I solve this problem? Fixed and growth mindsets are similar. Fixed mindsets focus on what went wrong and immediate results, while growth mindsets focus on solving the problem and thinking about how to improve for the future. And it's not just anecdotal, hypothetical fluff. There's actual experimental data showing how growth mindset helps us overcome problems and challenges. If you scan the brain activity of a person faced with a problem, you can see people with a growth mindset actively using their brain to come up with a solution, while fixed mindset people shut down their electrical activity because they're fleeing from the problem, either refusing to try solve it or focusing on how they must be terrible because they can't solve the problem. There's also robust data showing that students with a growth mindset tend to get better results and have better outcomes as they go through the school process, while students with a fixed mindset tend to do steadily worse year after year. This shows how the growth mindset is superior to the fixed mindset, both in steady sustainable growth over time, improving our problem-solving capabilities, and making us feel better about challenges, because we see them as positive things that help us grow rather than a negative thing that is going to cause us harm. Not sold yet? Well, here's another experiment that highlights the power of the growth mindset that also segues nicely into why people might have a fixed mindset in the first place. One important experiment by the psychologist Carol Dweck studying the concept of the growth mindset was a study around praise. First, Dweck and her team gave a bunch of 5th graders, as in 10 to 11-year-olds, a really easy IQ test. Like, so easy that most kids would score very highly on it. Next, the team would give half of the group praise for their intelligence, like, great job, you must be really smart. While the other half got praise for their effort, like, great job, you must have worked really hard at this. Essentially, the study was looking at how praises focused on innate intelligence versus effort put in would affect the students' mindset and performance. So to look at this, they then gave the children a choice for their next test. A harder test that was described as being difficult, but also a great chance to test themselves and grow, or another test just as easy as the first one. What do you think the students chose? Of course they'd go for the easy test, right? Well, here's the thing. 400 children in total were studied, 200 in each group. Out of the 200 who were praised for their intelligence, that is, the ones who were told that they must be smart, 67% chose to take the easy test. Not surprising, right? But in the other group, only 8% of the children chose the easy test. That's right, when they were praised for their efforts, 92% of children chose to take a harder test. They were all bring it on to the challenge, because they felt empowered to challenge themselves and grow, so they could be smarter through effort. Even more, they were noted to be working harder and longer than the other group, while saying that they actually enjoyed the test. Nerds. On the other hand, the group praised for their intelligence reported being frustrated with the harder test, and they'd give up earlier. So already we can see a startling difference between growth and fixed mindset. And remember, these weren't kids identified as being in one mindset when they first started. They were simply prompted into a growth or fixed mindset just by being praised on 2 different attributes. Now here's the real kicker. There was one more test in the experiment. They made the kids do another test that was the same difficulty as the first test. The results were astounding. The growth mindset kids, who were praised on effort, did 30% better on average compared to their first test. But in the fixed mindset kids, they did 20% worse on average. That's right, the fixed mindset physically made them do worse on a test, even though they all were doing just fine in the first one. Psychologists have done numerous studies since, and they found time and time again that not only does growth mindset result in measurable growth and positive change in people, but they can also be taught in a reasonably short time. But we're getting slightly ahead of ourselves. We'll talk more on how to develop a growth mindset a little bit later. The praise study highlights 3 important things. First, it shows that growth mindset works, with tangible results. Secondly, it gives us insight into why fixed mindset may be so common. We're raised to develop it. We saw how the children who were praised for their intelligence, despite the same quantitative amount of praise as the other children, did a lot worse on subsequent tests and avoided taking on harder challenges, a sign of a fixed mindset. This takes us nicely to our last lesson. That is, you should not praise people for their results or outcomes or their base attributes that they can't change, but the process. If you praise a child for their intelligence, what will they think? You might think that it will motivate a child to study harder because they'll want to be praised for being smart, but turns out you get the opposite effect. This kind of praise makes children believe that you are only praising them and loving them because they appear smart, so they avoid doing anything that might make them look stupid, which means they avoid harder challenges in case they fail. So instead of motivating them to work harder, they stagnate. Even worse, they might try to look good by comparing themselves to someone else who did worse than them, or even cheat. Whereas when you praise a child for their efforts, then they know what is important is the process of trying hard and working hard, implying that you can get good results and become smarter through effort. On a side note, it's also relevant to a great life advice I received when I was young, that you should never compliment people on something that they can't really change, like their height or natural beauty. But rather, you should compliment them on something that they put effort into, like their fashion choice, their makeup, or a piece of creative work that they worked really hard on. Anyway, you get the drift. Growth mindset is all about putting emphasis on the process. This means that individual data points don't matter as much. Did bad on a test? Well, guess I gotta study harder and smarter for the next one so I can get better and better grades. Weigh more than 80 kgs on the scale today? That's okay, I'll start eating 10% less from today to start reducing the weight gain. When you plot a series of data points on a graph, you can see what the trend is. If there's a positive trend that shows that on average things are getting better, then yes, you are growing, even if there are days when it looks like you're not. This contrasts to the fixed mindset, where people get shocked by individual bad results. Like people who can't take rejection as well, so they throw toxic, nice guy TM remarks, or people who quit a game because they lost instead of practicing to improve their skill. I've personally experienced the impact of a fixed mindset through my medical training. With this as some massive exams for our specialist training, like study for an entire year kind of big. And the biggest shock that we all get when we first start studying for these exams is just how badly we do in the practice exams. Here are a group of very qualified, very smart people who made it through medical school and have been treating patients for many years. Yet suddenly we're getting scores like 50 to 60% on our practice exams. And remember that these are people who were getting A's and A+ for breakfast through medical school, never failing a single test. If you have a fixed mindset, then your initial thought is, oh shit, I suck! I'm gonna fail this exam and I've wasted 6 months of my life, what am I gonna do? It can be a paralyzing moment because you thought you were pretty good at studying and now you're getting pretty terrible results. To some, this can be a real identity shock because they're used to being the smart one in the room. So the thought that they might not be that smart might shake them to the core. So you have to develop a growth mindset instead, or you're not going to pass the exam or end up with terrible stress and mental health issues during the exam study period. Instead of thinking that you suck, you have to change your mindset and think, okay, I'm not doing great in these practice exams, so how can I improve? Then you realize that everyone else is having the same problem, that you're still good at your job and you're steadily improving your score in the grand scheme of things, and that the exams are supposed to be this hard. So you change your study method, focus on areas you're weak in, using spaced repetition techniques to learn information, and doing a bunch more practice questions to get better and better until you pass. Yay! I remember that shift in my brain going from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset when I was studying for my first exam back in 2017. It was such a scary experience going from an A+ student with an 8.9 GPA average, I know, sick brags, to suddenly getting failing scores on my practice MCQs. But as soon as I shifted gears and took the focus away from the fear and stress to focusing on, oh hell no, I'm not doing the study all again, I have to pass, it made life so much easier because I suddenly saw the exam not as a giant monster trying to kill me, but a monster that I had to slay to be a hero doctor that overcame his exams. I mean, turns out it wasn't nearly as glamorous as that analogy, but I still passed. And I carried forward that same growth mindset for my recent exam that was double the length of the first one, and it helped me pass with much more confidence and fiery motivation. So that's a bit of a personal experience with the growth mindset. Let's take a short break, and when we're back, we'll talk a little more about how the growth mindset works to help our brain physically grow. Welcome back. So here's a random fact for you. Did you know that in ancient times, people couldn't read silently? Nowadays, people would laugh if you said you couldn't read a book unless you read it out loud, but back in ancient times, it was a very uncommon skill. In fact, there's even a passage from 4th century AD where St. Augustine remarks how amazing it was that St. Ambrose could read silently. To quote, "His eyes scanned the page and his heart sought out the meaning, but his voice was silent and his tongue was still." But fast forward 1700 years later, and the majority of people can read silently, because we believe it to be possible. If you don't think something is possible, your brain doesn't even try to do it. That's how important the growth mindset is. Now, of course, the progress of global literacy and the role of the printing press in making reading widely available is a whole nother topic, so please don't at me. Anyway, I thought that story was a good way to start this section, where we'll talk about how the growth mindset works. A super important fact you should take away from today's podcast is this. You can teach an old dog new tricks. Do you know why? Because your brain is plastic. No, I don't mean like Tupperware. I mean that your brain continues to grow and change and improve with time, as long as you put in effort. Your brain is like a muscle. The more you use it to think, problem solve, innovate, and be creative, the more connections and synapses it forms to become more complex and efficient. This is called neuroplasticity. Essentially, if you keep working your brain, like reading and learning and challenging yourself, it will keep growing, which in turn makes you grow and be a better person. Turns out intelligence isn't just something you're born with, but you can train and improve, much like any other skill, like sports, or a musical instrument, or juggling. If you have a fixed mindset, you don't even give your brain a chance. It's like skipping leg day. Your brain will just wither and atrophy away, becoming less and less useful until it's only full of reality TV shows, misinformation, and using the wrong yaw. But if you have a growth mindset, then you keep training your brain up as if you're hitting the gym 3 times a week, getting it the gains that it deserves. Because here's how growth happens. Let me lay down the formula for you. First, you gotta believe, like Rocky said. If you believe you can change, then you're motivated to try to change. Whereas if you don't believe you can change, then why bother, right? So if you believe, the next step is action. Like everything in the universe, things won't happen if a force is not applied. So you have to make an effort for positive change to occur. Otherwise, you're just a soppy dreamer whining about how nothing good happens to you. Duh, because you're stuck in your fixed mindset, not making an effort to grow. Now, this is an important point. The growth mindset isn't a magic bullet. Just because you believe you can change, you're not suddenly going to be a billionaire tech innovator who won 3 Olympic gold medals with 2 PhDs. Growing takes a lot of energy and effort. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about the 10,000 hour rule, where he suggested that the time required to achieve success in a certain field is 10,000 hours. Mozart, the Beatles, Steve Jobs, Roger Federer, all would have easily clocked 10,000 hours honing their craft. No matter how much of a natural genius you may be, you are nothing without time, practice, and sweat. The same principle applies to learning and growing. You're not going to get better unless you invest time and energy. So that's what action is all about. Practice, 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 then practice some more. And if you do that, you'll reach the third step of the formula, growth. But you know what the best part is? Growth will fuel your self-belief that you can grow because you just did it. This creates a positive feedback loop where your brain gets high on the amazing feeling of growth and expanding horizons and flow states as you challenge yourself and push yourself to be better. So you take more action, the brain learns more, and you keep growing. This is how sustainable growth is achieved. But the first step, as you can see, is believing in yourself through the growth mindset. Alright, hopefully by now I've sold you on how awesome having a growth mindset is, and how much good it can do for you in your future. So enough of the sell. Let's talk about how you yourself can develop the growth mindset through 5 easy payments of, no, just kidding, it's free! We've talked about why fixed mindsets might develop in children, extending into adulthood. It's because our current society puts the emphasis on final results and winning, like parents telling children they need better report cards, teachers rewarding children who have done well in tests, and all the sports stories of winning teams and how brilliantly they performed. So if you feel that after listening to this episode you might have a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset, don't despair. A mindset isn't something you're born with and can't change. That would be a very fixed mindset way to see it. No, you can develop a growth mindset as long as you believe in it, take action, and grow into it. I mentioned earlier in the episode that psychologists have been working on workshops to teach the growth mindset to people. Some are as short as 30 minutes. And of course, a 30-minute workshop or a podcast episode won't make you the master of the growth mindset, but it's at least enough of a start that it might already make a tangible difference in how you approach learning and growing. One of the most common tools used is the brain-muscle analogy. Kids who were taught about neuroplasticity and how, like a muscle, you can train and improve your brain power were much more likely to adopt a growth mindset, because they now believe that you can improve your intelligence through hard work. This acts as an initial seed of belief in your brain. If you have evidence that change is possible, then the cycle of belief, action, growth can start spinning forward. Once you learn about growth mindset and neuroplasticity, the rest is up to you to put the effort in. The first step is to develop insight and reflect on yourself. Are you currently in a fixed or growth mindset? If you often hear the fixed mindset voice constantly whispering criticism and fear into your mind, we have to address that first. But instead of directly fighting against it, you have to work around it. Carol Dweck talks about a method where you listen to the fixed mindset, addressing that it exists, but instead of taking it on as truth, treating it like a silly person that you can brush off instead. For example, you might give it a silly name, like saying, "Oh, Hans always going on his rants, saying I can't change when I clearly can." It's essentially okay boomering your fixed mindset voice. Another way to frame this is listening to your fixed mindset voice, then replying with your growth mindset voice, a form of mindfulness. Over time, the more you practice this practice, you'll find that your growth mindset voice gets stronger and stronger until it automatically outcompetes the fixed mindset. Next, you need to actively employ the growth mindset to daily practice. Remember the praise experiment. We want to focus on the process, not the results. If you don't get the outcome you want, like getting a job or winning a tournament, instead of criticizing yourself or giving up, you need to analyze the process. I'll give you a personal example. I play an amazing card game called Magic the Gathering, which can be played very competitively, with lots of intense decision-making and choices. When you lose a game, it can be very frustrating because it's not always just your skills that matter, but your opponent's plays and the luck of the draw. So a fixed mindset approach to losing would be blaming bad luck, saying the opponent just got lucky, or just getting really salty and rage quitting the tournament. But if you did that every time you lose, you'd never improve at the game. Plus, no one would want to play with you because you're just a salty loser. Which means you have to use a growth mindset approach. When I lose a game, I ask myself, how could I have improved my play there? What mistakes did I make that I should work on for the next game? What were some plays that were really good that I should remember to try again next time? I often even ask my opponents what their opinion is, like what would have been the correct creature to kill, since they know their deck better and would know the better interactions and plays. This makes me think of a game lost not as something that sucks, but a learning opportunity, so I can get better and better. So not only does it make me a better Magic player in the long run, but it also makes me less miserable and frustrated, while my opponent doesn't have to see me flip a table. It's win-win for everyone. The same approach can be used for school and sports. While you're studying for an exam, you can constantly review how well your study plan and your study method is working. For example, I knew through my fellowship exam study that flashcards and spaced repetition were working because I could see the slow but steady progress in my knowledge accumulation, even if my practice test results were going up and down. At the same time, I recognized that I was struggling with certain types of questions like neonatal resuscitation drug doses, so I spent more time memorizing those things. So by focusing on the process, I could avoid falling in the trap of thinking I'm shit, or that I'm the shit, and instead achieve steady, sustainable growth and eventually pass the exam. The same goes for sports. A good coach inspires their team to achieve victory and praises them for winning games. But a great coach will constantly give feedback to their players on what they could improve on or what they're doing right, while praising the progress and positive trends. Even if you're not in school or playing competitive sports or games, you can apply the same growth mindset to another important facet of life: relationships. In the case of romantic relationships, if you face a challenge like a rough patch with your partner, then instead of thinking maybe your partner is not the one for you or that you need to break up ASAP, you need to use a growth mindset. Believe that things can change for the better, communicate with your partner, and make more of an effort to work through the reasons why the relationship might be struggling. Of course, there won't be some core things about your partner that you can directly change, like whether they want kids or not. That's their decision. But there are so many other issues that can be worked out if people communicated openly and vulnerably more, and made an effort to meet the other person halfway. Similar principles apply to non-romantic, interpersonal relationships. We've already talked about how you should compliment people more on processes than outcome. So maybe make more of an effort telling your friends how much you appreciate the things they do for you when you're in need, or practicing their creative drive, or tenacity, or hard work trying to lose weight. Even hard things like boundary issues or the way they talk to you can be communicated with them gently, like you telling them that you don't like being teased by them relentlessly. If you think they'll never change, then you end up not even bringing up the topic and talking to them about it. Maybe they just didn't know that you don't like teasing. A growth mindset lets you enjoy so many more possibilities, while a fixed mindset shuts down all of those potential better futures. I mentioned these examples because they are all common decision points in daily life that you can try apply the growth mindset to so you can practice it. Because the growth mindset itself is a skill that you can learn and grow. So you need to believe that you too can have a growth mindset, then practice it as much as you can to become better at it. Lastly, don't ever stop learning new stuff. Keep challenging yourself to stretch your horizons. Remember the muscle analogy. If you don't use your brain to keep challenging it, it will shrink away like an unused muscle. But if you constantly challenge it with new things, it'll be tiring and sore at first, like DOMs after a gym session, but it will result in more and more growth until you have the swallowest brain in town. So keep trying new things, like learning new skills like solving a Rubik's Cube, or cross-stitching, or learning a new language. Find a hobby that can put you in flow state, that perfect balance between challenge and achievement where your brain goes into a state of pure bliss. Listen to episode 5 if you want more detail on flow state. But seriously, the more you believe in yourself, the more you'll be able to achieve with it, because it's all a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sure, the growth mindset isn't a magic fix that will turn you into the next Serena Williams or Michael Jackson, but I can guarantee that it will make you a better person with each passing year, with steady, sustainable growth, like a healthy investment. Now, of course, we should address that the growth mindset, like everything in the world, has limitations. The first is the so-called false growth mindset. Because the theory of growth mindset took the world by storm, it started getting taught all over the world, but not always in the right way. A false growth mindset is when people think they have a growth mindset, but they really don't. It's easy to feel superior saying, you still have a fixed mindset? I'm all hip and cool with the growth mindset, after reading one article or listening to one podcast episode. But in reality, it's a very deep and sophisticated mindset that requires a lot of practice and learning to really get the hang of. So a common mistake is when people only apply the growth mindset selectively, while ignoring the fixed mindset voice that keeps popping up and influencing their behavior. You have to recognize that no one has a 100% pure growth mindset. That's why we practice and grow to get better and better at it. Another good example is when parents and educators take the wrong lesson from growth mindset. Because they hear you should praise the process, some people will compliment children on every little thing they do, even if they're doing it very badly. This isn't a growth mindset at all, because you're not encouraging growth or hard effort. Children can get really confused that they're doing well and improving when they're not, or they might get cynical and skeptical because of your empty praises. Which is why constructive feedback is so hard. You need to actually analyze and identify what is being done well and what could be improved on. You can't just give flattering platitudes. Otherwise, the praise just feels like a consolation prize, not an encouragement. So don't fall in the trap of thinking you know everything about growth mindset and preaching it snobbily. Remember that it's all about attitude and having a mindset open to growing and learning and improving. It's okay to be wrong and to fail and to lose, as long as you're learning from it and trying to get better so that in the long run, you have a positive trend of improvement on average. Also, it's important to recognize that growing is freaking hard. Like practicing your butt off, analyzing the process, communicating with your partner in an open and vulnerable way, giving and receiving healthy constructive feedback, are all things that take a lot of effort and brain power. So don't get too disheartened if you find it difficult, or you feel like you're not progressing much. That's natural. It's like any skill. You wouldn't expect yourself to be a master concert violinist after playing violin for a week, right? And it's important to know that it's okay to not be constantly growing. That would make you a tumor. In nature, you notice that growth happens in a non-linear manner. Plants grow in the spring and summer, while they wither and conserve their energy in autumn and winter. Because if a plant kept growing upwards, it would just collapse under its own weight. Cells grow and self-destruct to prevent themselves becoming a cancerous growth. Economies go through cycles of growth and depression because unchecked growth can result in all sorts of issues, like hyperinflation and bubbles. Same with businesses. If they're only obsessing about growing each year, they eventually stumble and end up resorting to shady, unethical practices. So it's only natural for you to experience growing pains, taking some steps forward, but also some steps back. Because uncontrolled, continuous growth is unsustainable. That's why we constantly tell you that it's important to look at the process and the trends. Don't focus on a single data point like your weight on a given day. Plot your weight every week at the same time every Friday and see what the trend is. This will give you much more reliable information on how you're doing in terms of progress. Lastly, remember that growth applies to all aspects of our lives, and that includes our happiness. There are often times in life where it feels like rock bottom, or that it feels like things will never get better. Maybe it's a bad breakup, a serious episode of depression, or a global chronic emergency like a pandemic or climate change. But we now know through growth mindset that if you don't believe in change, change can't happen. So as hard as it is at times, you have to keep alive that little voice inside telling you that things will get better and this too shall pass. Because it will. It might not be today or tomorrow, but someday you'll feel content with your day rather than feeling miserable and hopeless. But the first step to getting there is believing in it, so that you can eventually take action to boost your happiness. Connecting with your loved ones, taking care of your body through eating and sleeping and exercising. Doing things you enjoy and put you in flow state. Being grateful for what you have, and being mindful of all the thoughts and feelings in your head. The first step to any kind of change or growth is believing and having hope, no matter how hopeless things feel at the start. Because as Emily Dickinson wrote, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Alright, so what did we learn today? We learned about fixed mindsets, where we believe that people can't change, whether it be intelligence, skills, or personalities. We learned about growth mindsets, where we believe that we can change as long as we work on the process and continue to strive to improve and learn and grow. We learned how powerful the growth mindset can be, both in terms of improved outcomes and results, and boosting our resilience against challenges and adversities, because we see them as learning opportunities. We learned that the brain continues to learn and grow, no matter how old we are. So we need to keep challenging it and exercising it, like working a muscle out at the gym. We learned about how to develop a growth mindset through believing in change, taking action to improve slowly over time, and analyzing our growth to fine-tune it along the way. We learned that growth is hard, and it's okay not to be growing all the time. It's all about the process, and it's the positive trends that matter. We learned that hope is the thing with feathers, and we can always work to be better, whether it be our school grades, our sports skills, our relationships, or our happiness. Alright, for today's 2-minute explain, let's talk about something related to growth, the square cube law. Imagine a gigantic dinosaur monster rampaging through a city, or a giant spider invasion. We see giant monsters commonly in sci-fi, but how realistic are they? Why don't we ever see gigantic animals the size of a building in real life? They'd be like the apex predator. Well, that's all because of the square cube law in biology. Because living organisms are three-dimensional, when you grow up by a factor, its weight, or mass scientifically speaking, increases by the factor cubed. For example, if you stretched a 15-meter T-Rex to a 50-meter Godzilla, you've increased the height by 3.3 times. But not just that, the width and depth of the T-Rex has also increased 3.3 times. So its weight must be 3.3 times 3.3 times 3.3 times its original, which is 37 times, because 37 is the cube of 3.3. So that's a massive growth in weight. Sorry T-Rex, not trying to fat shame you. Now, do you think the enlarged T-Rex can support its own weight? Muscle strength, unlike the weight, only increases by the factor squared, because it's the cross-sectional area of a muscle that determines its strength. So the muscle strength only increases by 3.3 times 3.3, or 3.3 squared, which is 11 times. Therefore, the load on Godzilla's body is exactly the same as the factor of its own growth, which is 3.3 times. As in, Godzilla's muscles and bones will experience 3.3 times the load a T-Rex would experience. This is the equivalent of you carrying 2 people the same weight as you on your back, plus a small child. So naturally, the giant monster will either get some serious arthritis, or get crushed under its own weight. This is why in the real world, large animals like the blue whale have to live underwater, where the buoyancy helps offset some of that weight load. The same goes for giant insects. They have it much rougher because insects have an exoskeleton, that is, a hard shell on the outside, rather than a skeleton inside them like us. So if you stretch the 1 centimeter ant to 10 meters, it would experience 1,000 times load on the shell, because its weight is 1 billion times its original weight, while the body can only support 1 million times its original load. So naturally, the bug will just crumble immediately thanks to gravity. Bugs also don't have a proper blood circulation system, so they rely on oxygen dissolving into their body through the shell. Because volume expands by a cube factor, and surface area expands by a square factor, this means that the bigger they get, the harder it is for them to breathe. This is why we saw gigantic dragonflies the size of birds in prehistoric times when the atmosphere was much more oxygen-rich, but now it's rare to see such massive insects. Thank God. So yeah, ironically, science is what ruins the fun of science fiction. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Explain This. I hope you've learned something interesting and maybe even useful today. I hope it gives you some inspiration for growing more and more in the coming new year. If you need more ideas and tips on how to set up healthy goals and directions for the coming year, check out my episode on New Year's resolutions to learn about the awesome yearly theme system. I feel like the episode was a great finale to my year of growth, and I've already chosen a theme for 2022, Year of Creativity. Happy New Year everyone, and we'll see you next time in 2022. Explain This was written and hosted by me, Jin Kim. If you'd like to suggest a topic or just send a lovely message, you can email me at explainthiscast@gmail.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter.